Welcome to Fred's 10-minute marketing courses.
Today we are discussing 3 simple steps from to-do list to marketing plan, written by marketer Fred Jame.
And putting yourself in the shoes of a beginner marketer it's a really interesting exercise. I want to speak directly to you, the listener, for a moment. Just picture your workspace right now.
Right.
Maybe you've just been handed the reins to a brand new product launch, you've done your brainstorming, and the result is just this massive, sprawling list of ideas. Your whiteboard is completely covered in sticky notes.
We've all been there.
Yeah. You've researched the newest trends, pulled the user data, you have a dozen different tactics written down. But as you stare at that board, a sinking feeling sets in. You realize that having a lot of things to do is very different from actually having a strategy.
It is.
The list just feels chaotic, it lacks direction, and if you've ever felt that specific paralysis, you are entirely normal. On the front lines, we see junior marketers drown in their own to-do list every single day.
It's perhaps the most common trap in the industry, really. What makes Fred James' approach to this problem so compelling is the analogy he uses to reframe it. Having a giant, unorganized list of interesting tactics is just like laying out raw ingredients on a kitchen counter.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Imagine you have a beautiful head of fresh cabbage. Next to it, you place 200 grams of premium pork. Then you line up your various spices and sauces.
Sounds like the start of a great meal.
It does, but those ingredients just hold potential. They are just a list. Without step-by-step cooking instructions, the sequence, the methodology, the timing, you can't just throw the whole head of cabbage, the raw pork, and a handful of dry spices into a cold pot, turn the burner on high, and expect a culinary masterpiece.
Yeah, you'd end up with an inedible disaster.
Exactly. The objective of our discussion today is to take your messy, disjointed ingredients and process them into a highly effective, logical marketing recipe.
That recipe concept makes so much sense because it immediately implies order. But before we actually start cooking, before we dive into the 3 steps Fred Jame outlines, we really need to talk about the prep work.
Essential.
Because you wouldn't just walk into a dark kitchen and start chopping blindly. You have to know what tools and ingredients you actually possess.
Precisely. You need a fundamental reality check regarding your own product's core competitiveness before you can ever organize a to-do list. Fred Jame points beginners toward a few classic frameworks to accomplish this. Specifically SWOT analysis, evaluating your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and FAB analysis, which breaks down features, functions, advantages, and benefits.
Right, the classics.
They are, and as brief linguistic context note here, the author is not a native English speaker, yet his seamless integration of foundational English acronyms like SWOT in his native language highlights a really important point. These marketing concepts are universally understood. The language of strategy translates across all borders.
It really does. And knowing your product inside and out on paper through a SWOT analysis is fantastic. But the source material brings up a frontline reality check that is notoriously painful. It's the absolute necessity of aligning your marketing data with your sales team's actual experience.
Oh, absolutely.
I've seen the nightmare scenario that unfolds when you skip this alignment. Marketing and sales can sometimes feel like 2 completely different companies operating in the exact same building.
That disconnect is legendary in corporate environments. The marketing department sits in the back office looking at spreadsheets, while the sales floor is out there talking to the people actually handing over the money.
Yes. Let me give you the B2B software example from the text. And for anyone new to the acronym, B2B simply means business to business selling a product to another company rather than an individual consumer.
Right.
So imagine a marketing team sitting in their office reviewing user data for a brand new enterprise software. They look at the analytics and conclude that the primary end users are young, tech-savvy middle managers.
Makes sense on paper.
Based on that data, marketing decides to go all in. They allocate the budget to create hyper-modern, IT-heavy advertisements filled with complex coding jargon, dark mode graphics, technical specs. It looks incredible. But out in the field, the sales reps are frustrated. They know a very different truth.
Because the sales team knows who actually signs the purchase order.
Exactly. They know that a young IT manager might use the software, but the person who actually approves the massive budget required to buy it is the senior CFO of the company.
And a senior chief financial officer evaluating a major corporate expense does not care about your sleek, back-end coding architecture or your dark mode graphics.
Not all.
They care about cost efficiency, return on investment, and implementation timelines.
If the marketing team never steps out of their bubble to talk to the sales team, they end up spending thousands of dollars distributing technical ads that the CFO literally cannot decipher. The result is a highly polished campaign that generates zero sales.
The frontline reality completely shattered the back-office theory.
Taking a step back to view the broader implications of that scenario, it proves a really difficult truth. If your foundational knowledge of who buys your product is flawed, no amount of clever social media tactics or expensive ad buys will save you. The recipe is ruined before the water even boils.
I love that.
That understanding leads us directly into the first official step of Fred Jame's process. Step 1. Identify. In traditional terms, this is your positioning.
Identifying the target audience sounds so basic, but it is executed poorly all the time. A beginner will often open a presentation slide, type target demographic 25 to 35-year-old office workers, and just consider the job done.
Which is a mistake.
A huge mistake. True identification is not that shallow. It requires a meticulous mapping of your specific product attributes to the exact right human being. It takes a lot of empathy to understand what a buyer actually needs versus what you just want to sell them. It also requires a brutal honesty about the limitations of your own product. The source material provides a brilliant case study involving consumer electronics, specifically a high-end gaming laptop, to illustrate what happens when you fail to identify the right user.
That laptop example is fascinating because it highlights the double-edged sword of product features. Picture an absolute beast of a machine. It possesses immense computing power, top-of-the-line graphics cards, internal cooling fans that sound like a jet engine.
Right.
It can run the most demanding software on the market without a stutter. But all of that power comes with a severe physical cost. The laptop is incredibly heavy. The power adapter alone is quite literally the size and weight of a masonry brick.
A literal brick. Now put yourself in the shoes of a senior manager who hasn't properly identified the core audience. You might look at the raw processing power on the spec sheet and conclude that high-end professionals demand high-end power. So you decide to market this machine to traveling corporate executives and business consultants. Consider the reality of trying to pitch a heavy machine with a brick-sized power adapter to a business traveler. What are a traveler's actual needs?
Portability.
Exactly. They need lightweight portability. They need a device slim enough to fit onto a cramped airplane tray table. They need a battery that lasts 12 hours because they're moving between airport terminals and conference rooms.
A business traveler would take one look at that massive power brick and walk straight out of the store. They would despise the product, not because it's a bad laptop, but because it actively hinders their daily life.
They would perceive the product's greatest strength, its massive power, as a fatal flaw. To succeed, you must pinpoint the hardcore gamers. You need a demographic that prioritizes pure graphical performance over portability.
The users who simply don't care if they have to carry a heavy backpack because the machine stays plugged into a desk most of the day anyway?
Precisely. If your positioning your identify phase is misaligned from day one, every single dollar you spend on promotions is wasted. You are serving a massive, heavy steak to a strict vegetarian. The meal is technically impressive, but it is fundamentally the wrong offer for the guest.
Bringing this back to the messy whiteboard, the practical application is clear. You take all the sticky notes that involve market research, audience profiling, focus groups, and data gathering, and you physically group them under the heading Identify. You prioritize them.
Right.
But once you have successfully identified that your target is indeed the hardcore gamer, a new problem emerges. Where are they? This moves us into step 2, reach.
Reach is the physical and digital pursuit of the audience. Now that you have properly identified the target, you must locate them in the wild.
Frontline observational skills become your absolute greatest asset during the reach phase. If we stick with our hardcore gamer from the consumer electronics example, you cannot just buy a generic billboard on a busy city highway and hope a gamer happens to drive past it.
No, that's a waste of money.
You have to study their digital and physical footprints. Where do they actually spend their time? Digitally, they're likely hanging out on very specific hardware modding forums. They spend hours watching specific esports streams online. In the physical world, they're buying tickets to major computer expos and massive gaming tournaments.
This raises an essential strategic point. Whether your company operates in a B2B environment, like our earlier software example, or a B2C environment business to consumer, selling directly to the public, the underlying logic of the reach step remains completely identical.
Yep.
You do not wait for the customer to magically discover you. You must physically or digitally place your brand exactly where the target audience naturally walks. You intercept them seamlessly on their daily path.
Meet them where they are.
Exactly. If your identified audience spends their evenings on a niche hardware forum, you allocate budget to buy banner space on that specific forum. If they travel across the country to attend the gaming expo, you ensure your brand builds a booth at that exact expo.
So, returning to the beginner's to-do list, you take the sticky notes that say, buy ad space or book event booth, and you assign them strictly to the reach category. But you only execute them in the locations you mapped out during the identify phase.
It creates a logical flow.
The chronological order suddenly makes everything feel manageable. You figure out who they are, then you figure out where they are. But then we arrive at the third phase, which is usually the source of the most stress for any marketer.
The inevitable end-of-month sales report.
The pressure from leadership can be overwhelming. You have identified the audience, you have reached them with a booth at the expo. Now the executives are knocking on your door asking where the revenue is. This is step 3, convert.
Convert is a heavily layered concept, and Fred Jame introduces a philosophy here that goes much deeper than simply getting a consumer to click a Buy Now button. He emphasizes the concept of preference. Yes. From a senior management perspective, true conversion is achieved when a customer thinks of your brand first. It occurs when they actively choose your product over a competitor, even if your competitor is offering a slightly cheaper price. That level of brand loyalty creates a massive protective moat around your business.
Which is the dream.
It is, but building that psychological preference requires over a year of stable product quality, consistent messaging, and continuous innovation. Preference is a slow, methodical build.
The reality on the front lines, however, is often much more urgent. Building a year-long moat sounds ideal in a strategy meeting, but companies often need cash flow immediately. If the business doesn't make payroll next week or hit the quarterly target, the long-term preference won't matter because the lights will be turned off. Marketers are constantly tasked with creating short-term conversion.
Navigating the tension between long-term preference and short-term revenue is the daily reality of the profession.
Fred Jame's work gives a fantastic case study regarding short-term conversion tactics. Imagine a technology brand that realizes they need a quick, massive spike in sales for the current quarter. Instead of waiting for organic preference to grow, they engineer a limited edition collaboration.
A classic move.
They partner with a wildly famous anime franchise to produce a specially themed, limited-run computer mouse. When they drop the product announcement, the anime fans go crazy. The inventory sells out in hours, resulting in an instant, massive cash injection for the company.
It is a highly effective tactic, but it requires strategic caution. Fred Jame perfectly encapsulates this tension between short-term cash grabs and long-term preference by using a market analogy. Marketers must deeply understand the difference between selling discounted vegetables to passersby at a twilight market versus operating as the trusted, steady vegetable supplier for a high-end Michelin star restaurant.
That analogy is so rich. Let's really break down the sensory differences between those two environments because it changes how you approach the convert step entirely.
Picture the twilight market. The sun is going down, the market is about to close, and you are a vendor trying to get rid of your remaining inventory as quickly as possible. You are shouting over the noise of the crowd. You are slashing prices on a chalkboard.
Just chaos.
Yes, you are relying entirely on the impulse buys of people who just happen to be walking past your stall. That is short-term conversion. That is the anime mouse collaboration. It generates immediate cash today, but it does not build loyalty for tomorrow.
And the Michelin star restaurant.
Operating as the supplier to a Michelin star restaurant represents long-term preference. In that scenario, you do not shout. You do not rely on gimmicks. You deliver consistent, premium quality produce day in and day out. Over time, the restaurant chef trusts you implicitly and refuses to buy from anyone else.
The danger arises when marketers confuse the two strategies. If you take your premium high-end restaurant vegetables and you start shouting about flash discounts in the middle of a chaotic twilight market, you are going to severely damage your brand image.
Without a doubt.
You might make a quick buck that evening, but the high-end chef walking by will see you acting like a discount vendor and lose respect for your premium positioning.
That is a vital distinction.
Yeah.
You have to know which type of conversion you are aiming for before you pull the trigger on a campaign. A twilight market discount attracts a very different demographic than a Michelin star experience.
Right.
If you heavily discount that heavy gaming laptop just to hit a monthly sales quota, you are going to attract bargain hunters. Bargain hunters are rarely loyal. They will not return to buy your high-margin accessories later. Therefore, your convert tactics must always loop backward to ensure they still align with your original identify strategy.
When you lay it out like that, the methodology is incredibly solid. You identify who the audience is, you reach out to where they naturally gather, you convert them by carefully balancing short-term hooks with long-term trust building. But the source material does not stop at the basics. There is an advanced tactic that completely changes how a beginner looks at their whiteboard.
You are referring to the concept of cross-step flexibility. The idea that a single marketing tool can serve entirely different purposes depending on how it is wielded.
Exactly. When you are first starting out, you tend to view an action on your to-do list in a vacuum. You assume a tool only performs one function. But Fred Jame points out that some marketing actions actually span all three steps. The perfect example provided in the text is media exposure.
Media exposure is essentially a strategic chameleon. It changes its color and function based entirely on the underlying goal of the marketer using it.
Let's walk through how a professional handles that ambiguity. Suppose you have a sticky note on your board that simply says, "Get media exposure." If you use that budget to cast a very wide net, perhaps you sponsor a broad, generalized thought leadership article about the future of global gaming on a massive mainstream website.
Yeah.
You are likely doing that to test the waters. You want to analyze the data to see exactly who clicks on the article and who leaves comments. In that specific scenario, media exposure is functioning as a tool for the identify step. You're using the media to figure out who cares about your topic.
Conversely, what happens if you take that exact same budget, but instead of a mainstream website, you place a highly technical, jargon-heavy article inside a very specific, niche, professional magazine read exclusively by hardware engineers?
A completely different audience.
Exactly. In that scenario, you are no longer testing the waters. You already know exactly who is reading that publication. Therefore, the media exposure has shifted. It is now serving the reach step. You are placing your brand on the daily path of a known audience.
And we can push it even further down the funnel. What if we want to turn the dial all the way to conversion? You take that same media exposure in the niche magazine, but this time you attach a limited time discount code or an exclusive early access pre-order link right at the bottom of the text.
That changes everything.
Suddenly, that exact same tactic media exposure has transformed into a direct mechanism for the convert step.
This is what separates an amateur from an expert. A beginner writes media exposure on a document, throws budget at it, and hopes for the best. A professional knows precisely which of the three steps, identify, reach, or convert, that exposure is meant to serve, and they tailor the copywriting, the placement, and the call to action accordingly.
Returning to our kitchen analogy, it is like looking at that raw cabbage. The ingredient itself is neutral. The magic depends entirely on your intent. Are you chopping it up raw for a quick, immediate slaw? Are you fermenting it for months to develop a complex kimchi? Or are you roasting it whole as the centerpiece of a high-end dinner?
Great point.
It is the exact same ingredient, but the step you apply to it changes the final outcome completely.
That analogy holds up perfectly. Once you assign a strategic intent to the raw ingredient, the chaos of the kitchen disappears. You are no longer just doing things, you are executing a plan.
We have covered a tremendous amount of ground today, and I really want to offer a practical summary for anyone listening who might still feel a bit overwhelmed by their own projects. Take a deep breath and look at your messy whiteboard. Take every single sticky note, every tactic, every data point, and force yourself to categorize them into three distinct buckets: identify, reach, and convert.
Put them in order.
Yes. Once you have sorted them, process them in chronological order. You cannot effectively reach someone you have not accurately identified, and you certainly should not try to convert someone you have not properly reached. By applying this simple framework, your random pile of stressful ingredients officially transforms into a strategic, executable recipe.
It provides a profoundly stabilizing framework for your daily work. However, I want to leave you with a final, somewhat provocative thought to consider, inspired by what Fred Jame outlines in his writings.
Okay, let's hear it.
We are currently navigating an era where artificial intelligence and automated marketing tools are becoming exponentially more powerful by the day. Algorithms can now practically automate the reach and convert steps. They can programmatically bid on ad space to reach consumers with terrifying precision. And they can dynamically alter pricing, imagery, and copywriting on a website to optimize conversions in real time.
It's true, the tech is incredible.
Because of this massive technological shift, we have to ask a difficult question. Does the deep human empathy required in the identify phase, the nuanced ability to truly understand human emotion, unspoken frustrations, and complex psychological needs become the very last defense and the single most valuable skill for human marketers?
That is a staggering question to ponder. When the machines can optimize the reach and the sale, the only thing left for us is figuring out the human heart behind the purchase. That is definitely something to keep in mind as you look at your strategy for the upcoming quarter.
Thank you for listening. If you have any thoughts on today's episode or marketing topics, feel free to leave a comment below the video. This is Fred's 10-Minute Marketing Courses. See you next time.